7 Things You Can't Say About China by Tom Cotton. Read by Orson Field. To the memory of Cowboy, my writing companion. Prologue. In the earliest days of the coronavirus pandemic, before most Americans knew where Wuhan was, I had concluded that the Chinese Communist Party was lying. Once again. In early 2020, China had reported an outbreak of pneumonia around Wuhan to the World Health Organization and claimed to have the outbreak under control. Yet the Chinese government continued draconian lockdowns and quarantines around Wuhan, built field hospitals from scratch, hoarded protective equipment like face masks and surgical gloves, and even operated crematoriums around the clock. Not exactly the actions of a government confident that it had the situation under control. I used simple common sense, not scientific knowledge or classified intelligence, to answer the bell early on the Wuhan coronavirus. I've never taken the claims of Chinese communists at face value. And when their actions contradicted their words, and they started covering up important information about the outbreak, I knew they were up to no good. Yet, when I made a few common-sense observations in those early days, you would have thought I had committed unpardonable sins based on the hysterical reactions not just from China, but also from its American apologists. At every turn, they tried to silence me and suppress my ideas. First, I advocated for a ban on travel from China into the United States. In phone calls and letters to Trump administration officials and in public statements, I urged this common-sense step. After all, China had already imposed its own travel ban from Wuhan. But Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, criticized the proposal as culturally insensitive, and Joe Biden denounced the ban as the product of hysteria, xenophobia, and fear-mongering, after President Trump halted travel from China. Biden and Fauci both would later reverse course. What's remarkable, though, isn't that both men were wrong. They often are. But rather that their first instinct was to leap to communist China's defense and attack its critics. And it was far from an isolated incident. Next, the Washington establishment rebuked me and others for calling the virus the Wuhan coronavirus, China virus, or Wuhan flu. I've never understood the controversy. There's a long history of naming pandemics and viruses after the locations of suspected origin. West Nile virus, Asian flu, Hong Kong flu, Ebola, and Zika are just a few examples. But if this custom offends Communist China, outrage follows. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Director Robert Redfield called these terms absolutely wrong and inappropriate. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi said they make us all less safe, and Senator Chuck Schumer called them harsh, nasty, and bigoted. Major newspapers and news networks echoed the scolding. After he became president, Joe Biden banned government employees from using these geographically accurate terms. The double standard was clear, and once again, it benefited China. Finally, I became the first national leader to say one of the most unspeakable things about the pandemic. The virus may have escaped from a lab. Again, this common-sense observation shouldn't have been controversial. Wuhan is home to China's highest-risk super lab, where researchers studied bat-based coronaviruses. A key researcher at the lab was literally nicknamed the Bat Lady. Moreover, American officials had warned 2 years earlier about lax safety practices at the lab, which was woefully consistent with China's long history of poor lab safety and lying about public health crises. Meanwhile, bats don't live within 100 miles of Wuhan, and the Wuhan wet market didn't sell either bats or pangolins, which Chinese communists had fingered as the culprit. Not surprisingly, a very early report by Chinese scientists found that the first known cases had not had contact with the market. In short, all the evidence from the beginning pointed.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?